Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Marketing. My name is Britz, Executive Coach, Trainer and International Leadership Facilitator, where we host the Lunchtime series and add value to people's lives, happening every day at 12 o'clock on ebizradio.com. Today we got Craig Page-Lee, Marketing and Communications Expert. Hello, Craig. How are you doing?
Well, and you, Kevin. Yeah, it's amazing how quickly the weeks are going into session 3 already.
Yeah, I can't even believe today's, we're already heading into February. It's ridiculous.
Actually, that's a good point. You know, 1/12 gone out the window. That's unreal.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like yesterday when I was just sort of getting into the routine of things and kind of going, okay, cool. So this is what's happening, and now we're here already. I'm going, wow, okay, let's do it. You know, Craig.
Brilliant.
So, I mean, don't you want to give us a bit of a summary from where we last left off? Because I think it's everything that you've shared around social media, the privacy, what people should really know, and sort of to what we're going to be talking today. I think it lends itself well to everything. Don't you want to just give us a quick summary?
Yeah. Kevin, thanks. Yes, so obviously the first 2 sessions here, we started looking at the likes of the WhatsApp debacle and privacy and personal information on the back of that, through to last week where, on the flip side of that is on the back of Twitter, everybody almost exposing their whole life to the potential of being scrutinized by analytics in the back end. However, just to caveat that, obviously not taking names and individuals' personal data into that analysis, but really just using digital data to define behavior in the marketplace. And yeah, I thought that would set quite a nice context to where we're going as a media industry, marketing communications industry, into 2021, and what did 2019, 2020 look like relative to spend. There was a lovely trajectory projected, and then COVID hit the world, and on the back of that, spend didn't necessarily happen. In some instances, dried up entirely. And I just thought, as we've been talking around measures and analytics and data behind the industry last week, let's look at it in the broader context of the measures of actual commitment to the industry moving into 2021, and where this will go and what possible trends we see around the world.
Yeah, it's so interesting that this is a topic of discussion, because I remember when COVID hit, one of the first things that came out of sort of a trend, or what I've sort of overheard and sort of read about online, was a lot of the times, because COVID hit, because of the state of the world we're in, we tend to want to shrink down and we tend to cut back on everything, like marketing, training, all of that kind of those expenses. But there were forerunners in the world kind of going, no, actually, this is the moment where we really need to up the game here. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting. And that's what we're talking today, right? We're talking about
very much so. Very much so.
And what are the trends, where we're going, and what's happening in 2021.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned the fact that some folk did see the reality of leaning in and continuing to spend. I always think of an incredible statement or quote from Maggie Thatcher, says, never waste a good crisis. And for me, that's the reality. The brands that understood the crisis are the brands that really are the ones who I think got a bit of a head start and put the effort into understanding the crisis to extract the value that they really need to. So, just to set some context, always need to set context, because this is quite a broad topic. And the one thing that you might not be aware of is that there are global groups that every single year work very hard to put forecasts into the marketplace around the industry, both from an advertising media spend point of view. So you've got IPG, which is the Interpublic Group. You've got the WPP group of companies. You've got Omnicom, Publicis combined, merged. And then the big one on the media side is the Dentsu Aegis group. And they've all set certain key times in the year where their research departments look at the spend from the past 2 years year-on-year aggregated spend, whether it's gone up or gone down, and then they put in place a forecast for the forthcoming year. And the forecast for 2018 through to 21 actually looked for some good reading in the space, and you obviously saw some really good detail going into the shift across channel, not just across media spend in its entirety, but very much around channel, from TV and video, digital growth, et cetera, some of the obvious things. But those forecasts sort of were stopped in their tracks with the arrival of COVID. And this unprecedented event, nobody in the world had any idea it was coming. And obviously the entire industry had no idea of the extent to which it's going to impact our industry. So, firstly, we have to look at where we were at, what the projections were, and then I want to give you a bit of a feel from sort of the top 4 media groups in the world as to what they think the collective spend is going to be moving forward. So, the charts are showing us that from 2019 through to 2021, we were seeing substantial growth. If you look at October 2019, worldwide, there was an expectation of $622 billion US dollars growing to $759 billion US dollars over that 2-year period. Yeah, that's a substantial growth. And running up through to 2023, from the 662 in 2019 to 839 billion US dollars in a 4-year period. Well, obviously that didn't happen, and that isn't going to happen. And we've got a course correction that's coming from the end of 2019 into 2020. And what the Big Five have done, or at least the Big Four media groups, is they've brought in a little bit of sort of sense and sensibility by recalibrating what the real growth potential is moving into 2021, 2022. So let's give you a sense of that. So the Dentsu group, it was Aegis, and then they joined with Dentsu from Japan a couple of years ago to create Dentsu Aegis Group, and they've just rebranded late in last year to Dentsu as a single core proposition. They were the last to put forward their forecasts for the year ahead, looking at worldwide ad outlook, and they projected that there was a real decline of 8.8% overall in 2020 from 2019, and they project a 5.8% growth heading into 2021. So, a 5% growth on a 8.8% decline, we're still not at the figures that 2018 or 19 were at. So, the industry as a whole is in a rather low end of its cycle.
Yeah.
Group M, interestingly, just on that point, Dentsu gave the downturn figure. They presented the highest forecast. They said, in 20, we did see 8.8 decline. The likes of Zenith Optimedia, they reported 7.5% decline. Then we had quite a big difference to the Group M's at 4.1 and Magna at 4.2. So interesting to see that the lower end are 50% of the forecast of the upper end. But that is quite interesting because it's quite different when you're looking at the forward forecast. As much as Dentsu have shown us that we had the biggest drop, that's based on their forecast, there actually is a much bigger drop in real term. They're also presenting very much the lowest of the forward growth gain again. Whereas the likes of Group M, who was at the lower end of the spectrum at 4.1%, they're projecting a 10.2% growth moving forward globally. And that's a substantial jump, because they're saying you're going to have a positive growth on where the market was in 2020, which I don't necessarily believe, to tell the honest truth. Similar for Magna, they're showing a 7.6% growth on their 4.2% decline figure, and sensibly, Zenith are very much in the spectrum just below Dentsu. They're showing a 5.6% growth on a 7.5% decline of 2020. So you got two groups showing wonderful growth moving into 21 through to 22, and you've got two that are showing realistic, as far as I'm concerned, the growth is not going to outspend what the decline was in 2020.
So
That,
just to
yeah.
clarify, so, if we're looking at these numbers and how they sort of, what they're putting forward for 2021, is that a consensus that they're just suggesting that could potentially happen in the world if you are spending and you are actually using your part of your marketing or your budgets to actually spend on marketing?
Yes. And actually, that's a really great question because it is consensus. Okay. And what they've done is they have access. So if you look at the top four, they're probably dealing with the top 500 brands around the world. Most definitely the top Fortune 100s, the top listed entities and things like that. So working with those brands from the Coca-Colas to the BMWs to the Apples to the Samsungs and Huawei's, they have a real understanding of big brand spend. Okay. And they've got quite a substantial history with those brands, and those brands do move around those groups. Every 3 to 5 years, there's global pitches, whether it's on creative or media or digital alone, whatever that may be. So there is a bit of movement around within the group. So brand would be with one group for 5 years, another group for 5 years. Each of those groups get to understand the sort of the spend over that period of time. So they've got some wonderful historical data that they're able to review relative to what has happened in the marketplace, what are the drivers behind that, what influences spend up or down, and then also the seasonality of the brand, that specific brand in its portfolio of existence. Is it at the end of its life cycle? Is there a bit of energy to kickstart it again, kind of thing? And they use all of those permutations to create that forecast view. And in most instances, there's a great correlation between the various groups. However, this level of difference is quite surprising to me. To have 50% measure of decline difference in one spectrum to 40% measure of difference in the other spectrum is quite substantial. But it is a good indicator for the brands working with those organizations to understand what they should be providing and putting aside to drive effective marketing activity for that period in question.
So do you think this kind of information influences how businesses across the spectrum sort of spend on ad or on their sort of forecast for their budget for ad spending? Or
yes.
Is it specifically big corporations, big brands, big numbers?
This is very much structured around the big business side. When you're getting into smaller markets, there's obviously a different basket of value that the smaller businesses have got to play with. So that at the get-go, they're not spending anywhere near the same value of money, and therefore the impact. And they're also not necessarily using the same channels to the extent that the big brands are, and therefore the impact on their spend might be slightly less. But it'd be great to, in the next minute or two, just pick up on channel. But there's also really an interesting piece of analysis that came from Statista on the actual sectors and how the respective sectors have moved in 2020 and what we expect to see moving into 2021. But here's an interesting stat as well that I just wanted to share with you. Overall ad spend by country, we saw the USA decline 10% year on year in 2020. We saw Great Britain decline by 12% year on year, and we saw Germany decline by 12% as well. What is interesting here, if you look at the total spend in the USA, it was 107 billion US dollars.
Yeah.
And in the UK, it was 15 billion, and in Germany, 7 billion. So, China 53 billion, China 50% of the USA market. It's just incredible to see how the two big superpowers are spending substantially more than everyone else, but America is spending 50% more than China is in advertising spend. Just outrageous amounts of money that are coming through in that regard.
What does it speak to if you look at the year-on-year decline from each country? Why the decline? I mean, year-on-year. So I'd understand 2020, specifically for what it was, there would be a drastic decline. But is there an indicator on why the spend is just going down year-on-year?
So moving into 2021, course correction is an unknown at this particular point, because we're still bound by some of the challenges that COVID brought the real world. Okay. The hard lockdowns of 2020 have reappeared in 2021. And the first half of 2021 isn't going to be a trigger Nike tick effect where suddenly you've gone through the base of 20 and you're starting to rise into 2021. Nobody really foresaw the second and third wave variants coming along, and the stringent lockdowns happening around the world, which means a lot of the marketing spend that would have happened in places outside of digital or television is actually gone to zero in some instances, or in their own channels or platforms dropped up to 50%. And I've got some wonderful examples to cite from a great study done in South Africa, which we'll get into in a while. But relative to the brands in question, the categories in question, the engagement with consumers changed substantially during COVID. And automotive, for instance, some markets are biased in automotive. Automotive definitely isn't on the spectrum of shooting the lights out in reinstating ad spend, because people are housebound. The entire tourism, conferencing, accommodation, airlines, cruises, that entire industry, in fact, some of it will never ever recover, in my humble opinion, were totally obliterated. There are cruise liner companies that will never see the ocean again. Those industries in certain markets in certain countries were a big contributor to the GDP of those countries. Okay, and with those tourism markets now being ineffective, there isn't going to be much spent in that environment until the course correction, until the world opens up and becomes more free with its movement in a healthy, safe way. So there are different impacts relative to different sectors on different countries, and therefore the different channels and medium that have been used in those environments. So,
sorry, Craig, but what I'm noticing is, as you're speaking, from someone who doesn't actively, because I'm not actively involved in marketing, but when you're looking at the numbers like this, it's quite significant on the impact that COVID has had on environments, on spending, on drastic ways that people are actually using their money and where they're putting it. It's quite interesting to see the scale shift so drastically.
Yeah. And to that point, I'm going to look at a wonderful chart here, which really points that out. So telecoms and utilities as a sector was tracking at about 8.5% growth projected pre-COVID. Okay, COVID came along, they still grew by 4.3, so 50% of the anticipated growth over that period, but they didn't go into negative growth or negative spend. However, the one that surprised me a bit was pharma and healthcare. They were projected to grow their advertising spend by 3.7, but interestingly, they had a reduction in spend minus 2.1. Now, you would automatically think that we're in a healthcare crisis, brands would be spending more. Well, actually, the reality is the brands that mattered at that point were still under development in terms of vaccines. So there wasn't necessarily an increase in spend able to be gauged and measured at that point. And whilst the world was in lockdown, and Discovery Health is a fine example of a statement they made, there is a surplus of medical aid spend that wasn't used by the medical aid subscribers because people were homebound. The entire flu season was missed. Okay, so the medical aids didn't have claims from the medical aid subscribers because there wasn't a flu season. There were certain things in the healthcare world that didn't happen, and therefore the spend from the medical aids is sitting in a surplus. Now, what is that saying? It's saying that in the environment of an entire flu season not being present, that means that the flu medication advertisements weren't necessary at that stage either. So there's a direct correlation as to what happened in the environment relative to a waste of money on something that is not going to be seen, not going to have relevance at that point in time. So there's a reduction to that particular sector.
So, I mean, just taking that into consideration, it alludes to exactly what you said about never underestimate a crisis, considering how people are spending and how people are reaching.
Yes.
In crisis mode, we have to pay attention to what the consumer is really looking for. And
to that point, yeah, there's three that I want to pick up on, and the most interesting is the financial services sector. So financial services was projected to increase its ad spend by 11.8% going into 2020. And again, this is from the Statista report. They had an 18.2% growth in advertising spend.
Yeah.
And it's obvious. So financial distress, people working from home, loss of jobs, reduced income over a period of time, refinancing homes or cars, extending financial options, taking medical aid top up, gap cover policies and things like that. So you could see where the bias went relative to the need state of the world actually at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So that was one there. And then leisure and entertainment, whilst it had a nominal projection of 4.8% projected for ad increase spend, they actually had a 28.7% reduction in spend over the period, which is totally understandable. But the biggest one was automotive, 31.2%. That is a substantial reduction. So you can see the state of the world, the nature of where consumers are relative to their needs state, and the brands that fit in the needs state would be the brands that would need to be advertising and making a commitment to make the brand more relevant during that particular period. And as we come out of COVID, there'll be other aspects that now start pulling back up. And if you go into a micro layer of understanding there, Kevin, the likes of the healthcare brands, the online gyms and the Mr. Deliveries and Take-A-Lots, their spend went up because they became the relevant platforms for everybody to be ordering through. So wherever you went in the digital world, there was a Take-A-Lot or a Superbalist or one of those kinds of brands that raised its head in the digital ad space. But I mentioned there's a chart here which is really fascinating because South Africa ranks in the top 5 on the chart that I've got in front of me here. It's consumers' view on brand communication during the coronavirus pandemic worldwide as of March 2020 by country. Now again, Statista a chart early in the virus, but it's picking up some wonderful sentiment. On the back of this, Kantar did some incredible research, and they launched 3 really good studies during the course of 2020, I think at about 3-month cycles. And the three studies looked specifically at what brands were doing in terms of communication during the period. Were they changing their comms? Were they trying to be more relevant in their comms? Were they bringing a sense of support and peace of mind to the communication? And could consumers lean in and find empathy from those brands, and therefore those brands gain more traction in the need state of those folk around the world? And this chart is very much along the same lines. And basically what it did is, hearing from brands I use about what they are doing to respond to the pandemic is comforting and reassuring. In South Africa, 72% of the sample size had a positive association with brands that were providing relevant, valuable, meaningful, helpful information on the pandemic, but also what they as an organization were doing to bring value to their particular customers and prospective consumers around.
Yeah.
Really, really positive. But the Kantar study is a superb study. Yeah, I should send you a few of those, Kevin, for you to familiarize yourself with.
As you're talking, what's interesting, Craig, is from a business owner's perspective, from smaller businesses owners' perspective, you just before this, you also mentioned from a sort of micro advertising point. Do you think that by sort of doing your own sort of inspection about what consumers are really doing and how they're spending their time, where they're really focused, and you know, what are they sort of what's that? How they're actually using media? You know, because you also mentioned earlier in one of the graphs about the TV ads to mobile ads to, you know, and essentially that in itself will also indicate where people are really spending their time to get more information.
Yes.
Do we as business owners kind of go, okay, well, let me go and find out more, because in part of my strategy then would be, okay, where are people really and obviously spending time, and how do I tap into that? Is that part of the conversation that we should be?
Yeah, very, very much so. And Kevin, that's such an open-ended question as well, because there's so many layers to that question, which actually I'll try and address as many as I can in this conversation. But it's a really wonderful conversation, because one of the things that actually needs a dedicated session is actually the fraud that goes with advertising spend and media allocation. Because whilst you think your audience is in a particular place and you're being guided by the media agency to dedicate and allocate a substantial portion of your budget, let's say into digital buying audiences in the digital space, there are an inordinate amount of bots on the back end that were actually falsifying the reality of clicks and views and things like that. So there's a whole setup of criminality on the back end that actually compromise and jeopardize the folk who actually got little money but have put the effort into subscribing to agency recommendation and things like that. But really, at the end of the day, the industry is there to help clients. Strategy is developed, communications frameworks in place, content strategy in the back of that end. Agencies, media buying agencies, comms agencies who've been working again in the space for years understand the best place to engage with consumers. There's constant research panels ongoing, and that's the beauty about research. It's something that is constantly evolving and understanding, and every single time there's another pull of data into that, you get a richer data set to understand where your brands are, what they're thinking of, what their needs are, how to communicate with them. And that goes to the conversation of, you know, the right message at the right time in the right formats kind of thing. So the agency world is structured to bring that kind of value to clients. However, there's an entire spectrum of SME and businesses just slightly larger than SME that really can't afford agency fees, and they do find themselves compromised at times because they're either going with gut or the seat of the pants, or this mate is advising them on that kind of thing. So there is a layer where there may be a bit of wasted spend. However, the caveat, the counter to that is the brands in the middle to the upper end that are actually stepping in to take more control of the decisions made by the bigger agencies are actually the brands that are winning. Yeah. Particularly in the space where the majority, if you look at internet advertising in many markets, is sitting at around 50% of the marketing allocation, advertising spend allocation. Okay, 50%. Within that 50%, about 20 to 22% of that is sitting in mobile space. Now, 50% of your ad spend in a digital space is 50% of vulnerability of being exposed to bot fraud on the back end if your media agency is placing you in a CPM, CPC environment where you're buying volume to see audiences. The audiences are unverified in many instances, and the buying platforms are sending you validations of a view or a click, but it's a validation relative to the algorithm and definition that they put in the back end, which isn't necessarily the human eyes or the human click that you're seeing. So there's a risk that media budget is wasted, advertising budget is wasted. Yeah. What we are seeing is big brands are tightening the screws on agencies, and measurability and performance and audits are becoming a much more frequent requirement in the big spend, so that that allocation to the right channel to meet the audience in the right mind at the right place and with the right format or medium becomes more effective.
So yeah, I mean, and taking into consideration all the measurement that you mentioned now, because it really does, it becomes important on what's happening. What are we doing in South Africa?
Yeah, South Africa, that's a great question. We're actually quite a sophisticated advertising and media sector, so which is really, really encouraging. And that's, yes.
I'm just sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there. There's some, are you moving papers? Or?
Oh, I just did that. Yes, sorry, yes.
Sorry, it was just something. So let's just go from there. So how it's affecting South Africa.
So South Africa is a very sophisticated advertising and media country. And we, all the brands that I mentioned to you in terms of the media houses, the Dentsu, the Magnas, the Publicis, and that, they all have representation in South Africa. And a lot of that on the back of South Africa is the global platform for the global brands into the continent. Okay. And for a long period of time, South Africa was the head office for many, many global brands that wanted presence in Africa. What we have seen, though, is a couple of those are broken away and they're based in Dubai region. So there's a bit of a less dependency on South Africa to manage the continent. What they're using is Dubai to manage sort of the northern part of the continent, and they're using South Africa to take care of the SSA region. But South Africa is sophisticated and it really does understand and utilize the channels in the way that the global brands expect. And with that knowledge in place, it's able to bring that learning into the local brands. So, in South Africa, again, Statista has got some really good measures year on year from 2018 to 21 by medium. We're spending across TV and video, internet, newspapers, B2B, a growing segment, out-of-home, radio, magazines, cinema, music and podcast, video games, and esports. And those are the key medium channels that are being used worldwide. And it's really great to see the incremental detail that has gone into the research to understand South Africa's use of those channels as well. And just to give you maybe the top three across each of the years, obviously the total spend in South Africa by US dollars is substantially less. So we report in this particular set of documents, it's in rands. TV is sitting at 7.286 billion for 2020, projected to go to 7.475 for 2021. Internet, look at this, 7.03 billion rands for internet spend in 2021. Newspapers, half of that. Out of home, sad, because out of home has been totally obliterated by the fact that hard lockdowns, people aren't out and about, and therefore the spend is really declined substantially. Radio still at a high end. Magazines right down. Cinema absolutely obliterated. And video games and esports sort of finding a constant. They didn't go down because obviously a lot of folk were engaging in sport and online sport, esports during COVID lockdown. But what is really nice relative to the South African market is a report that I came across, Kevin, which is developed by Scopen, an international body. They have presented this particular report in its current format for the last 10 years in Europe. And for the first time at the end of 2021, a report was launched in South Africa, and they developed that report in conjunction with IAS, which is the Independent Agency Search and Selection Company. Really, really phenomenal business, founded in 2007 by Joanna McDowell. Joanna McDowell is an industry legend, an incredible voice for the industry when it comes to research and understanding client-agency relationships and agency-agency relationships, really one of the benchmarks out there. And nice to see Mark Lives, one of the great platforms and content aggregators for our industry, did a survey at the end of last year. And just to quote it, it says, IAS is rated as the most recommended pitch consultants in South Africa by advertising executives. So, a really great, credible piece of research. Nice to see it coming into South Africa through the likes of IAS, and some really great facts and stats. So the data was collected between September the 15th and October the 20th. So really fresh data. And first time that the industry has had this level of research in it. And what I'm going to do is just give you a quick snapshot of how the research was conducted and the companies that were involved. And really what it was looking at was during that period an up to the minute impact of COVID on marketers' budgets, on the sectors, on the brand categories, and if there was advertising recovery and what the marketing spend would look like. So in South Africa, 36 companies took part in the survey. 61% of them were local-owned companies, and the spectrum of size there as well. 39% being multinational, playing into the point I made earlier where we get a strong global presence here. FMCG services and durable consumption goods, really the important services actually to have looked at during the COVID environment, because every single one of those sectors had relevance to us during COVID. And here's an interesting stat. 61% of these organizations that they met with the marketers had 1,000 employees or more. So headline findings. 58.1% of the marketers decreased their marketing budgets and ad spend during the period. 30.6 maintained a constant, stable budget. 5.6 actually increased their spend by up to 20%. 5.6 raised their spend between 20 and 30%. And the average of the budget reduction was 21%. So again, looking at the categories of FMCG service and durable consumption goods, you can see that there was a validation of the intent to some degree of why budgets would have been raised during that period from foodstuffs and the likes.
Yeah.
So, nice understandable facts there. 55% of the largest advertisers in South Africa think that the industry will start recovering sometime in 2021. Yes, it will. I think that there's a delay on that because, again, with the second phase of COVID really biting us the way it does, it has been a much slower anticipation. And if you look at the likes of Tokyo Olympics, Paralympics, and things like that potentially being moved out again, that big surge of global spend for big brand activity, that in itself is evidence that there may well be a lag on finding budgets again. Some say about 12 and a half months, a year and a half before budgets come back again. Nearly 26% think their investments will reactivate in January. Well, obviously we'll need to wait till the middle of the year to see where the stats go. 3 out of 10 suggested their investments will improve in 2022, which is quite an obvious thought. And 9.7% think that the industry will be back to pre-COVID only in 2023. Now, for me, that's quite a realistic statement. I think it's going to take at least 18 months to 2 years to see a course correction.
Yeah.
The biggest losses in terms of the disciplines of where the spend went down below the line, which is your promotions, activations, experiential events, again, an obvious expectation, 26.7%. Above the line advertising, which is your traditional medium, 18.8% drop during that period. Digital media buying only dropped 3.7%. So whilst digital as a whole went up, it's a relative to where in the digital mix that the spend was reallocated. Digital media creative and content, 1.9% rise. That was nice to see that brands were understanding that in the digital space, content became the biggest driver of stickiness and resonance with brands. Cinema, 81% drop. Magazines at 65.5, newspapers 64, out of home 45.1% drop, and radio 38.9% drop. People weren't in their cars. The morning show, drive time home in the evening, that was it, just wasn't going to happen. And the gains, as I say, the gains were digital and media creative, and television, 50% rise in some instances, but specifically around the durable goods category, not as a platform as a whole.
Craig, so just in aim of making sure we get to our time limit here. Don't you want to just give us sort of a summary of the ending of why this is so important and points to note about everything that we've spoken about today? I think, and also maybe where we can find some of this information. Can you share it with us online?
Yeah.
Twitter account, or maybe where we could just click on it and see and engage. But in summary of today, like what are we looking at, and why are these things so important to recognize?
Okay, I think the most important thing here is for marketers to understand that their budgets do need to drop. Well, firstly, they do drop in tough economic environments.
Yeah.
Secondly, they need to understand which areas of the budget to drop and which areas not to, because you can't just step out of the market. You need to be present in the market, and you need to understand the channels and the platforms that have greater resonance and meaning to your consumers. Spend more time with your strategy agency, spend more time really working the media agencies in terms of their buying strategies as well, to get to understand the validation and authentication of your media spend relative to the areas that it's allocated to. Work hard at creating content to feed consumers necessary, relevant, and meaningful content, so that when they are engaging with your brand, they feel like you care, that you're having the right conversation with them, and that you're bringing some value to their lives, that you're showing empathy, that you're there to support, and that you're there to make a meaningful difference, not just to their lives, but the country and the planet as a whole. Don't just cut budgets. Really work hard to understand where you need to and why you need to reallocate to other areas, but stay close to the agencies and the delivery of those budgets.
Yeah, and I think I love that you say that, because just a bit of education, a bit of research, a bit of looking at the numbers, you can, the more you inform yourself around what the trends are out there, and so what sort of what's the word? What sort of strategy that people are taking around how to affect their businesses. It doesn't necessarily mean you just have to stop advertising. It's just a case. How do you cut back? How do you do more? And Craig, so in summary of today, and looking forward to next week, what is that going to look like?
Yeah, so cross-platform understanding is most important, and knowing your consumer is probably the most important thing to understand the cross-platform relevance. And on the back of that, what we're going to do is next week is a very, very exciting conversation. I've made contact with a couple of the leading contributors to share some key insights and learnings from one of the most important academic books launched this year, namely the Marketing to South African Consumers textbook. It's relevant to marketers, business owners, agency-side individuals who want to gain a deeper insight and understanding of consumers in South Africa. And Gillian Rightford, Parmesan Mudlia, and possibly Umpa Maseko will be joining us in the session, and just sharing about how they went about gaining these insights on consumers and what that means for the industry moving forward.
That's amazing. I think that's going to be a really interesting discussion. And yeah, when you have experts and people who are working in the field, that it really lends itself to the why at the end of the day. So really exciting. Craig, thank you for today. Thank you for sharing the insights. You've given me a lot to think about on in terms of how you market and what's important. And lastly, if people want to get hold of you, what's the quickest, best way to do that?
cpagely at gmail.com, through my LinkedIn profile, Craig Pagely, it's PAGE-LEE in LinkedIn, and at CPL_Ignite on Twitter. I think what we should do then is maybe on my LinkedIn page, I'll just create a separate section where I can just start pasting some of the content of these particular charts that I've used in the conversations. Obviously, everyone is referenced by author and publisher, so they're getting, a validation in that instance, but it'd be great for folk to be able to see those and actually use them in a more meaningful way when referencing the podcasts.
Absolutely. Yeah. And guys, please go and check it out. These are also going to go out every Thursday at 12 o'clock on ebizradio.com. You're going to get all the information there. Please join Craig and I on our social media platforms. We're going to tag each other in the post so that it becomes relevant. People can click on it, and it's a quick, easy share. Please like and share the video as well if you come across it. Craig, thank you so much, and thanks for joining me for the Lunchtime Marketing segment.
Thank you, Kevin. Look forward to next week.
See you next week. Cheers for now.
Bye.